Well, welcome everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And joining me today is David Gellis. He's a journalist and author who reports for the New York Times on their climate team, and he writes the Climate Forward newsletter and events. He's also been a business reporter and has written several books, including The Man Who Broke Capitalism, Mindful Work, and then last week, Dirtbag Billionaire, how Yvon Chouinard built Patagonia, made a fortune, and gave it all away, debuted. So thank you so much for being here, David.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit before we get into the book on where we're at today in general, because you've written a lot about the rise of billionaires, and we're in a moment where Trump has successfully campaigned against elites and draining the swamp. But the budget bill that he helped shepherd through Congress, um, according to the CBO analysis, benefits the top 1% at the expense of the poorest 10%. At the same time, we have Bernie Sanders. He's got his successful Fighting Oligarchy tour. So America has always had complicated class politics. How would you describe where we're at today?
Well, there's no doubt that everything you said is true. I think what makes this story, Dirtbag Billionaire, so unusual is that it sort of exists outside all the temporal reference points that you just mentioned. I mean, Yvon Chouinard was an iconoclast. He was someone who had a very fraught relationship with his individual wealth. He was someone who would comment on sort of, as we saw, the excesses of billionaires and the unfairness of the tax code, as said. He, like Warren Buffett, was among those billionaires who was very happy to stand up and say he was willing to pay more taxes.
Right.
Um, and nevertheless, of course, one man, one individual, one company can't change it. And so it is sort of the ultimate counterpoint to the messed up world in which we find ourselves.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and tell us about how different Chouinard is from his peers, and about your journey in writing this book.
Well, I've been covering CEOs, corporations, and billionaires for almost 20 years now. I used to write the corner office column at the New York Times. I did a lot of our philanthropy coverage, so covering things like the Giving Pledge and when big billionaires would donate their fortunes to universities, whatever. I would often get roped up in that coverage. And then I also spent a good deal of time looking at how some of the most prominent billionaires in our society used their wealth to try to influence policy and society to suit their aims. Um, that was the background, that was the context that I brought to bear on this story. And this was a book that intrigued me for a number of reasons, but I do think one of the big ones was because Chenard sort of showed that there was a different way to be a billionaire in
Hmm.
this society. And when we think about sort of the Elon Musks and the Zucks of this world, how they are, often sort of their political dispositions is shifting with the wind and with the administration. When we see that, certainly in the case of Musk, deeply getting involved in some of the operations of the federal government. The Chenard story, again, was just such a refreshing counterpoint. And one of the things that was remarkable to me as I engaged in the reporting was that he was consistent. The same things he cared about literally 50 years ago in 1973 when he first started making his first grants to environmental activists, when he first started thinking about issues like conservation. Those are literally the same sort of myopically focused set of issues that he still cares about today, and that he uses his money and Patagonia's influence to try to exert some pull on. And so, again, like there's no way that we can snap our fingers and magically sort of uncorrupt a lot of our political processes. And
Hmm.
yet, I think this story is an example, a roadmap for other wealthy individuals who want to think about how they can show up. And at the grandest level, and we can get there, what he did with Patagonia itself, the way he restructured the corporation to actually, A, not be owned by him and his family, but B, donate 100% of their profits to these same set of causes, that provides sort of a roadmap for how other companies might think about this as well.
Right. And he's been a long time environmental activism, and that obviously shaped the mission of the company and what they do. And you talk about the fact that he really hasn't wavered from that. Talk to us about what are the ways that he has put that into practice and what his company has done.
Uh, so from the very outset, environmentalism was at the heart of the story. A pivotal moment came early in his career before he started Patagonia, and he was just making rock climbing gear. He was making these pieces of hardware called pitons. These were essentially, think about like a large sewing needle, except they would either screw or hammer them into the rock, and then they would
Right.
use those to affix their carabiners and their rock I mean, this is we're into the realm of sort of technical rock climbing stuff.
Right.
But after several years of this, he was making them. He noticed that they were damaging the walls. That
Yeah.
by going up over and over these big granite walls with his friends, that they were actually sort of leaving pock marks all over the granite walls that they cared so much about. And so when he saw this, he sort of in an instant resolved to stop making those. Now he didn't have a roadmap. He didn't know what was going to replace them. And this accounted for like 99% of his business. But that real commitment to say like, oh, wait, something I'm doing, my main product that I'm putting out into the world is damaging the things I care about. I can't have any of that. That set the tone for a whole series, generation after generation. And I have more examples if you want them, of instances where he and his leadership team would identify a problem. And rather than sort of sweeping it under the rug or saying, we'll get to it one of these days, they said, no, we're just not going to participate. And I mean, just as a counterpoint, can you imagine if the executives at Meta read the research and said, oh my gosh, Instagram is really harmful to the mental well being of young people and young women, especially? We're going to radically overhaul it to make sure that doesn't happen, right? I don't need to say it. That's not the world in which we live.
No. No, that is extraordinary. But it's interesting because, among, the folks that are really passionate about our public lands and about the environment and, are often, sportsmen or, rock climbers or hikers, there's this ongoing debate about, well, we want everyone to have a stake in these public lands and enjoy them, but we don't want to
Mm,
damage them. And so there's like this debate at Yosemite National Park, which is my favorite place on earth, about do we have too much human impact in the valley where we have all of these campgrounds, which makes it accessible for people, but what's the risk? How much are we actually damaging the lands that we want to preserve? And so it's fascinating to try and thread that needle like he has with a
mhm.
company that obviously, is founded on, serving that demographic that wants to enjoy these lands, but do so in a responsible way. And at a time where outdoor activities have gotten exponentially more popular as well. And I'm sure that's something that he saw, especially in recent years, and had to contend with.
Yeah. Uh, Two come to mind. One is from very early on in his career when he was.
So, David, you are breaking up at this point.
I mean,
We're going to try and get David back. I'm so sorry about these difficulties. This happens sometimes. This is such an important conversation. His book is just fascinating. As somebody who loves outdoor activities, it's great to see this marriage between really intensive reporting on the business side with the environment. Are you able to hear us again?
Yes, I certainly hope so.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm sorry. Would you mind taking it from the top on that one?
No, no, and forgive me, everyone. This is one of these situations where we have full Wi-Fi coverage, no other devices, hooked up to the internet, and of course, this is the moment where everything goes sideways. So, my sincere apologies.
Sorry, folks. We just had him, and now it's a little quiet. We're hoping that we can get him back. But as I was saying about the book, it's a really interesting look, especially as we have been talking so much about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and just the damage that billionaires, can do in our society. Um, Taking a look at a billionaire like Chouinard and, his strengths, his weaknesses, it's a full view of him. But he's someone who has been committed to giving away his wealth and trying to fight for the causes that he believes in, and not shying away from fights with the Trump administration and with folks who are opposed to his politics of preserving the environment. And so David's book came out last week and on September 9th. And I know last week felt like a very long week, but you'll definitely want to check it out. And in our write up of this conversation, I will put his book cover and how you can get it so that you can all find it as well. Hi, David.
Okay,
Can you hear us?
I am. I can. I'm now on my personal hotspot. So, like, I have disintermediated. Here's what I think is happening. I think some of the corporate interests that control the Wi-Fi companies heard what we were talking about and got so pissed off that they started to throttle the internet,
That's how
um,
good this conversation is.
successfully, but not permanently disrupting our conversation. So I have worked a back end. I am now on my personal hotspot. So let's just hope my cell provider doesn't get wind of this and we should be good to go.
Great.
So forgive me again.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little more about, this push and pull that
Yeah.
Chenard was feeling, with his company and with this increasing demand for his products, but at the same time, that's putting more and more strain on the environment.
Yeah. Uh, and this is really the tension at the very heart of the book and the whole story, right? Like there's a paradox at the center of Chenard, at the center of Patagonia. And what I came to realize in my reporting is that it's not one with any easy resolution, right? There is some inherent tension here, creative tension. There is, you could even call hypocrisy in some of their actions and some of the things they espouse. But it was in the work of trying to reconcile their activism and their consumerism, their impulse to protect nature, and the reality that in order to make the products they wanted, they had to have an impact on the natural world. It was this push and pull that they used, Chenard and his team used, not only as a source of motivation to get better, right? They would identify these problems, like the one I mentioned, and they would say, like, all right, rather than sweeping it under the rug, how do we actually harness this as an energy to try to use it to improve? But it was also, at the end of the day, what I think customers responded to, right? But part of this story is not just about one company, it's about how the world responded to it. And I think consumers, media consumers, all recognize that this self-aware corporation is such a rare beast in this world, and that to see a company sort of wrestling
with its own imperfection in a real and sustained way was so different than what most companies did that they were willing to go along with Patagonia for the ride. And I think that's part of what made this such a unique story. But one thing I was trying before I got cut off, you mentioned sort of uh, how much you love Yosemite. And I think anyone who's been there can relate, right? It's an extraordinary place. Chouinard was one of the real pioneering climbers back there in the 1950s, first ascents of some of these big walls. And he at one point suggested making it a Yosemite only, uh, uh, basically an experts only climbing club, right? So only the most elite climbers in the world would be able to be there, which spoke to his real elitism, which is a part of this story, right? He's a complicated guy. Um, that said, you fast forward almost 50 years, and it was in 2017 that Patagonia sued the Trump administration during the first term for trying to reduce the size of national monuments. And so you
Yeah,
have on the one hand Chouinard, the man, trying to sort of protect this and isolate it for him and his sort of like-minded radical mountaineers, and at the same time using his company during that same career to try to protect public land for all Americans. I think
right,
that's off to get.
right. Yeah, and let's talk more about that. And David, if there's any way you might be able to speak up a little bit, I know some folks were still having trouble hearing you, and I apologize, folks. Sometimes things don't work perfectly, but I appreciate you sticking with us. Um, but obviously now there are even more threats to public lands, and we saw that some of that was dodged in the budget fight, but those issues are coming up again. What has Patagonia and what has Chouinard been doing now in the second Trump term?
Um, well, they haven't sued the president just yet. I think these strategies take time, and my sense is that they're sort of looking to pick their spot. I
Mm,
can't comment on whether or not they're going
right.
to make another lawsuit. Are people able to hear me a little better now?
A little bit, yes.
A little
Thank
bit.
you.
Okay. Forgive. This is that I've been doing these for a week, and this is you just catching me on like the one where everything's going wrong.
This
So
is when people knew that you were going to break news and they're trying to throttle it.
yeah, truly. Here we go again. Um, but they are. But here's what I'll say. Patagonia may not have sued the president yet, and they may not this term. I can't
Hmm.
comment on that. But what I will say is that, 8 years ago, when President Trump first came to office, I was the reporter at the New York Times who did so much of the coverage of how corporate America was speaking out against President Trump during that
Yeah.
first term. I wrote stories about all the big tech companies. I wrote stories when the Business Council was dissolved, right? Every time Trump would say something controversial, corporate America would speak out and say, that doesn't reflect our values. This time around, you hear almost no company making those kind of remarks. And
Right.
instead, you see this real effort to appease the president and to try to work with the administration. And now I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I will say it is a sharp contrast to what happened 8 years ago. And there are just a few companies who are still out there every day raising hell and saying that like what's going on is not okay in their mind. And Patagonia is one of those companies. Um,
Yes.
they are still using their voice. The current CEO, Ryan Gellert, hardly a week goes by when I don't see him sort of mouthing off about what the EPA just did or what happened in taxes. I mean, this is a company that is still using its voice in as much as it has one, because it's not a giant company. I mean, we're not talking about Walmart here. It makes clear what it believes in and where it feels like this administration is moving the country in the wrong direction. And that is notable. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it is a really sharp contrast this term to the first term. You know, uh, Obviously corporations are notoriously risk averse, and it seems like in the first term of Trump there was a lot of trepidation because a lot of things that were coming out of the White House you would get fired for in corporate America, and so and there's obviously your top concern is your shareholders and making sure that people stay on board with what you're doing. But it's been striking because there have been some of Trump's economic policies specifically with tariffs, they've taken a huge chunk out of a lot of businesses, corporations' profit margins. And yet, as you're saying, there's been a lot of silence, much less about any other policies in terms of like DEI or the environment, and so on and so forth. Um, as a longtime business reporter, do you have any insight about, what is going on for this big shift?
I mean, here's what I'll say. I will essentially summarize reporting I've done for the Times over the last several weeks and months, which and the message that I hear is that companies are afraid. I
Mm,
don't think that comes as a surprise,
mhm,
um, given that we've seen this president be, aggressively target individual corporations. And so, from a purely mercenary point of view, you can look at a CEO who's got a Ford looking down on them and shareholders looking up at them and facing a president who is known to go after individual corporations. I can't say I'm entirely surprised. Again, I'm not
right.
saying it's the right thing to do, but as someone who has covered corporate America for 20 plus years now, it's very easy for me to understand the calculus here. I think
Mhm,
what is hard to reconcile again is that these same CEOs, many of these CEOs who are in their chair now had the same job 8 years ago, and they were screaming at the top of their lungs 8 years ago
mhm,
for the exact same issues, or even less. You could argue, and this time around, silent. That, I think, is why many people look at that and they really doubt the authenticity of some of those claims. That I think
right.
they look at that and they say, "Well, how serious is corporate America about anything that they say, whether it's DEI or ESG or CSR?" Right? A lot of this, in that context, can look like greenwashing and marketing rather than a real expression of values and commitments on behalf of a corporation.
Right. I mean, when you see, so many corporations, in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement they had these new, beefed up DEI policies, and now just a few years later they've rescinded them all. Obviously, it causes, some cynicism there. But that is the nature of corporations. I mean, they seek out stability in whatever way that they can, and clearly it's a different political environment now. Um, I did want to talk to you a little bit because you had mentioned in a previous interview that it was really difficult to get Chouinard to open up to you. He's not someone who really actively seeks the spotlight for himself, more for his causes. So how were you able to finally break through there? Because, you've put together such an extraordinary book on him.
Well, thanks. It was a process, and it's not one that began just in the last couple of years. I've actually known Chenard for more than 10 years now. I first interviewed him probably back in 2013, maybe even 2012, and I've stayed in touch with him. Then at the New York Times, I was the one who covered the company. I covered that lawsuit against President Trump. I
Mhm,
interviewed their CEOs. I wrote other stories about the company, just in my role as a business reporter. But then 3 years ago, uh, Chenard took this extraordinary act of sort of giving away the company, and when that
mhm,
happened, I broke the news, and that was an enormous story. It was the biggest story I've ever written from a page view perspective, and after that, it became clear to me that I was gonna write a book about this company.
mhm,
I approached the company, I told them as much, and they said, "Well, we don't quite know if we want you to do that." And I said, "Well, let me be a little clearer. I am writing a book about the company. I hope you participate. I hope you cooperate."
mhm,
And and then I said about doing the work. But it was a full year before of the reporting process before I ever spoke with Chenard himself.
yeah,
And I think part of that is because he was reclusive. I think part of it is because they were sort of waiting to see whether I was going to do the work. But
mm,
then after several months, when they started getting uh, emails and phone calls from employees who had worked there 40 years ago And when they started getting calls from Chouinard's childhood friends,
Mhm.
and they understood like, oh, I'm actually doing the work of writing this,
Yeah.
then he finally agreed to speak with me. And I wound up spending a substantial amount of time with him over the past few years. I was at home with him, slept in his children's beds, woke up and cooked with him in the morning, went to bed sort of after long meals with him, hiked in the woods, went fishing, met him in South America, went on road
This
trips.
sounds like an awful assignment.
Better reporting experiences than my last book about Jack Welch, the former
Yeah,
CEO of GE.
right.
Yeah, it was
Which you
and
could
very
perhaps have used the same title for a different reason.
perhaps, yes, indeed. Yeah, if dirtbag was used in a strictly pejorative sense with Jack Welch, I think it would apply. That would be something. I could have used the same title for both books. But to address the title, if I may, dirtbag. The title is Dirtbag Billionaire. Um, Dirtbag in this world is actually a term of endearment.
Right,
It's an affectionate term that refers to an outdoor, an itinerant outdoorsman, an athlete, a man or woman who is so unenamored with materialism that they are literally content to sleep in the dirt, right? All
right.
they need is their next climb. All they need is their next time in nature. That's enough to satisfy them. And Chouinard himself has always identified as a dirtbag. In fact, when he first heard the, he was upset, not because of the word dirtbag, but because of the word billionaire.
Yeah. Um, well, I think that's really fascinating to hear about your writing process because, I found when I've just written profiles of people, I actually prefer starting not with the subject, but with, building it out, first with the easiest people to get to know and then, getting more into their inner circle. Because then it makes for a more informed process when you actually talk with them. And sometimes you only get one shot, and so you wanna make sure that it's your best shot possible, and you actually understand, and can ask really good questions instead of just the basics. But of course, I can't say that I've had as fun assignments as, that I actually get to go, hike with someone, that I'm profiling, but fingers crossed, that would be incredible. What was
Let me
kind
let
of
me
what
ask you. Let me ask you. Who's your dream profile? If you could profile anyone, who would it be?
I okay, actually, like, if I were doing that, I would go hiking with Cheryl Strayed. I think that would be great. We could do, like, a little more of the Pacific Crest Trail, going at it as, like, 2 middle-aged women and what that's like now. That would be fun.
Let's manifest it, folks. We should make this happen.
Tell us at least about one experience you had when you were just out there with him, and kind of what that moment was, and what you learned in that process.
Uh, the one that keeps coming back to mind is just fishing with him in Argentina. And Chouinard now is 86 years old, and
Mhm.
literally just about the only thing he wants to spend his time doing is fishing. And he is now regarded. I mean, he was a world class climber, a great surfer, the kayaker. Um, but he is today regarded as truly one of the best anglers in the world. And so
Wow.
I spent 5 days with him at this fishing lodge in Argentina, in the middle of nowhere. I mean, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Foothills of the Andes, snow-capped mountains, uh, literally like a permanent rainbow in the sky. It would just sit there
Wow.
all day for hours, which is amazing to behold. Black-necked swans and pink flamingos flying around, golden grasses, no other humans around for hundreds of miles. No joke. And we would walk from fishing spot to fishing spot, looking for like where the best rainbow trout, where the best brown trout were on that
Mhm.
day. We didn't talk a lot during those hours that we were out. Um, but what was amazing, more extraordinary than the fish I caught, which were awesome, more amazing than the surrounding, was watching him fish. And then more specifically, even watching the fishing guides who were with us watch him.
Ah,
We were with the best fishing guides in the world. I mean, these are truly world-class anglers at one of what is regarded as one of the most extraordinary fishing lodges in the world. they bring the best people there and they have the best people to serve them. But these guys would follow Chouinard and they would hang back 100 yards away and they would sit on the banks of the river and watch him because they were learning from him.
Hmm.
And that was an incredible opportunity to sort of witness transmission, right? There was a transmission of wisdom. This was a man who'd been an expert fisherman for decades now. And these much younger guys were
Mhm.
watching him and they were watching his every movement, from the flick of the wrist to how he uh, chose his spot, uh, every little nuance, and watching their respect for him, which was something that I couldn't even fully appreciate because I'm not that big of an angler.
Right.
But you could sense their appreciation for what was happening, and all of this was silent, right? All of this is basically nonverbal, and yet like I drew real meaning from that process, and I tried to bring some of that energy to the pages of the book.
That seems like an incredible metaphor for your book in general because, he is in the twilight of his life, and obviously he has left a legacy, but that is the point that he's at, having given away the company. And there are lessons that he is hoping that people will take from that, and, um, it takes a really gifted writer to be able to convey that, so I appreciate you sharing this with us, and I apologize to everyone about the technical difficulties, but I promise you the conversation is worth it. If you go back and listen to it, you can turn it up at full volume and, get the full effect. And David, I hope that you'll come back and talk with us again, and we'll make sure that we, get all the kinks out so that we can, have the best conversation we can.
I appreciate that, and forgive me. I do blame our corporate overlords and the IT department. So forgive me to the audience. But it was such a delightful conversation. Thank you so much. Uh, the book is Dirtbag Billionaire. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.